Hi, my name is Michael Andrew, and I am about to give you your free tutorial on Canon's brand new SL3. It's one of the smallest, lightest DSLRs in the world at the time of this recording, and it'll shoot 4K video. If you are an experienced photographer or you're coming from a different system, check out the table of contents that we've put together in the description. If you go Command F or Control F, depending on the computer that you're using, you should be able to type in the keyword for the topic that you're looking for, and if we have a chapter marker for it, it'll highlight, you'll be able to click on the time code and jump to that lesson directly. Spent a lot of time putting that together. And what we're really trying to do is to replace any manual for the camera. I always do better by watching versus reading. If you are a brand new photographer and this is your first camera, I have to give you a word of warning. This video is not going to be enough to help you to go out and take great images. This deals with the operation of the camera only. My hope is that if you enjoy this course and find it helpful, you'll want to check out some of the other resources I have available, including a digital photography crash course, which will teach you the basics of photography in less than 2 hours. And we are also working on the Canon SL3 crash course. This is all the advanced techniques. It includes the digital photography school, but I take you out into real-world shooting situations and I demonstrate how to use the SL3 for portraits, landscapes, time-lapse, vlogging, advanced video shooting techniques, and things of that nature. It'll allow you to maximize your investment in your camera. We even have lessons on built-in flash, strobe units, things of that nature. Finally, a great resource you should check out is Tony Northrup's Stunning Digital Photography. Tony's a friend of mine. He did not ask me to say this. I just think it's a wonderful resource for a beginning photographer. Be sure to hit that subscribe button to both of our channels. We have a ton of information to cover, so let's get started. Let's take a look at all the buttons and ports of our brand new Canon SL3, so you know exactly what each does, and you will know what I'm talking about later in the video. The most important button is the shutter button, and you'll notice that it has two positions. The first is a very soft, spongy resistance. This is going to allow us to focus the camera. Pushing the shutter button down all the way will actually take the picture. Train your finger to feel the difference between the halfway button depression and the full depression. This is going to make it very useful when getting focus and recomposing. Just behind the shutter button, we have the primary selector, which rotates to the left and right. Behind it, we have the ISO button and the display button. And to the south of them, we have the power switch, which also has the video record mode. The mode dial will help us to select different shooting modes. You'll notice on the top of the camera on either side of the Canon logo, there are two tabs. Pulling up will activate the flash, and pushing down will close it. On the back of the camera, we have the deep menu button and the information toggle button. Above and to the right of the viewfinder, we have the diopter adjustment. To the right of the viewfinder, we have this button that has the camera icon and a red dot next to it. In a still shooting mode, this is going to activate live view, which will allow us to preview our shots on our back monitor. In our video recording mode, this will start and stop video recording. Just to the right of the touch monitor, we have the exposure compensation button. Below it, we have the directional pad, which we can push up, down, left, or right. It will help with navigating through different menus and selection options. In the middle of it, we have the set button, which is like an enter button when navigating the menus, but this also acts as the Q button, which stands for quick menu in our shooting mode. Below them, we have the playback button, and the garbage icon, as you guessed, allows us to delete images. Next to where our right thumb would rest, we have our focus cluster selector and our auto exposure lock button, which can also act as our flash exposure lock button. On the opposite side of the camera, we have the lens release, which we'll need to press every time we want to remove a lens. And you'll notice that most lenses have an autofocus to manual switch, and if they have image stabilization, they'll have a switch that will allow you to turn that on or off as well. Beneath the camera, we have the battery and SD card slot. On top of the camera, we have our hot shoe, which allows us to connect speed lights. One quick side note on the hot shoe is that you will notice the center pin is missing. The reason why this is important is because non-Canon flashes will not work on the SL3. We have to purchase and use Canon branded flash accessories. We'll be talking more about this on the full course. Underneath the gaskets on the left side of the camera, we have our remote and microphone port, and on the right side, we have our HDMI out and USB ports. So that's an overview of the camera's external buttons and ports. If you ever forget which button does what, just come on back and we'll go over it again. Now let's go into an overview of how to operate and control the camera. Before we get into the camera itself, I want to point out a few things about the lenses. When you get the camera, you'll have a cover on it like this, and you'll see this dimple here, which will line up on the red mark on the top of your lens mount here. The red mount is for EF lenses, and the white mount is for EF-S lenses. What are the differences? EF lenses are designed for full frame sensors, so they're the size of a 35mm frame of film, and the white dot lenses, the EF-S lenses, are designed for crop sensor cameras, and the SL3 is a crop sensor camera. And because it has a smaller sensor, there is a magnification factor on the lenses, like this 18-55 I'm about to put on. So even though I know you can't see this very well, it's measured at 18-55, it has an equivalent focal length of about 29 to 88 millimeters because we're multiplying these numbers by 1.6. Because of the smaller sensor, there's this multiplication factor to get the equivalent focal lengths of the lens. And I'll talk more about this on my general photography course. On this lens specifically, we have this white dot. And so when we put it on the first time, we're going to line up the white dot to white dot. And if it was a red dot lens, it would be red dot to red dot, and then we would rotate this until it clicks. Something else I want to show you is that under the lens cap, we will have the filter thread of that particular lens listed. In this case, it's 58 millimeters. That's important to know if we ever decide to attach lenses. And one more side note is that you can definitely put EF lenses onto a crop body. Can't put EF-S lenses onto a full frame sensor body because these lenses, the way they're designed, the lens is a little bit longer from the flange mount and it'll bump the mirror. So don't try to put an EF-S lens on a full frame camera body. Full frame lenses all day long on a crop sensor. Camera, we have our SD card slot. You'll notice that the pins are facing the battery. And I'm using an Extreme Pro. I'm a huge fan of these memory cards. The main thing that you want on this is there's a little symbol here that says U3. That is important for 4K video recording to maintain a sustained writing speed. If you just put any old junky memory card in there, you might notice that your 4K video doesn't record very fast. But easiest to remember, pins towards the battery. And something that I'm noticing is that the battery, sometimes it doesn't want to, it kind of tugs a little bit. But if you look at the pins are also towards the memory card. So if you just think of the pins facing each other, that makes it a little bit easier to get started. Turning our camera on for the first time, we should be prompted to set up our date and time. I live in Hawaii, so we don't have daylight savings. But something that you're going to notice is that the touchscreen is very fast, it's very easy to use, and we're good to go. Something I'm going to show you, and that I'm going to encourage you to do immediately, is that I'm tapping the shutter button to return to a shooting mode, is that as we rotate the mode dial, we get these different prompts from the camera. And what's happening is the camera's trying to give us some help, but I find these menus confusing, and I also find myself tripping over them as I'm shooting. So we're going to come into the menu section, and we have these different tabs, and I'm going to show you how to turn this back to the standard display versus the guided display. I think the guided display is something I'm not a huge fan of, so we're going to go back to the traditional shooting screen. For the menu displays, we're going to go to the traditional deep menu system, and now you can see we get this totally different look immediately. This is what we're used to on most Canon cameras, and it's going to be pretty seamless if you ever decide to upgrade. The mode guide, so when we change the modes and we get these guys, I'm going to turn that off. We're also going to turn off the feature guide. And at this point, we have a totally different setup and display. Again, very common on most Canon cameras. There are two buttons you should be aware of, and to demonstrate why this can cause a lot of confusion, I want you to push the display button on top of your camera. And as you do that, you're going to notice the back monitor turns off. If you press that button without knowing it, you're going to turn your monitor off and you're going to be struggling to figure out what the heck you did. The second place this can happen is over here with the info button, is so that as we push the info button, we're taken to this black screen as well. This information screen, which is called the Q screen, is very powerful. We'll be talking about it in a second, but the question you're probably having is, how do I get to live view to see what I'm shooting? You're going to press this button, which is the video record button in the video mode, but in a still mode, this is going to be your live view button, and that is going to flip up the mirror, and now we're in a live view shooting mode. If we come back and we continue to press the info button, we're brought through a series of different screens with all kinds of information I will walk you through in a second. Pressing the display button doesn't really apply because we need to have the monitor in live view. What I want you to do is get into the habit of knowing how to toggle these screens on and off to come through the different sets of information, and how to jump in and out of live view. This is a pretty good exercise. Something you'll notice immediately is that you can shoot through the viewfinder using the optical viewfinder, or you can also shoot using the back monitor, and there are different interfaces for each of these. However, before we get into all this, I want to point out some critical shooting information that you must be aware of. It's on the bottom of the screen here on the far left. We have the shutter speed, which is how long the sensor is exposed to light. And then we have something called an aperture. It's given in F ratings. It's going to be to your benefit to understand apertures. And so if you have no experience with photography, definitely invest in some sort of beginner's course. I have one. Tony Northrup has one. Learn what f-stops are in that nature so you understand what we're doing when we're changing all of these settings. This here is the exposure compensation bar. We'll be talking about it later. And then we also have ISO. ISO can be changed by pressing the ISO button on top of the camera and then rotating to the left or right when we select our ISO setting. Think of ISO as an electronic boost to the sensor. It doesn't really control light hitting the sensor. It boosts the light hitting the sensor. And when you have very, very high ISO, if we were to turn this up really high and take a picture, and let's dial in a faster shutter speed, and we were to take a picture and look at that picture, by the way, we can zoom in on when we're playing pictures by touching and dragging our fingers just like we would on our smartphone. Kind of hard to see, but there's some grain here. There's this noisy grain that you see, and this is common with very high ISOs. When we use lower ISOs, we'll need a longer shutter speed to let in more light. I'm just demonstrating this as an example, the difference between high and low ISO. When we zoom in, you can see that the image is much cleaner. So there are going to be times and situations where it's dark and you're going to bump your ISO up. You're going to get some more grain, but at least you'll get the image. And other times you're going to want to minimize the ISO, and so you'll turn it down. A lot of it depends on how much light you have. And the touchscreen on Canon cameras is amazing. They're really great. You can see that I'm in the playback mode and I'm just touching and dragging my finger just like I would on a smartphone to scroll through. If we had many images, so if I'm going to take a couple here, and we were to play back, we could zoom out further and we can get to this grid that we could also navigate by scrolling up and down by touching on the touch monitor. However, all that said, something I want to do is walk you through the rest of this information that we're seeing in these different screens. This is the touch shutter button. So if we were to touch on the monitor, the camera's trying to focus, and once it focuses, it'll take a picture. I'm not a huge fan of that, to be honest, because I bump the screen. So I leave it turned off most of the time. We have our tracking modes. We'll talk about the focusing modes and all that stuff. In the top left-hand corner, we have our shooting mode. We have the total number of images remaining. We have the number of images in this buffer that we can shoot. And then we have our battery life. This Q button up here refers to the changing of the settings. So if we come in here, we have all these settings on the side. We'll talk about these in a second. But if I were to come over and press the info button again, keep on toggling it, we can cycle through all these. And if I come back out, let's talk about this Q screen. To access the menu items in here, we can press either this gray Q button. So anytime you see a button that's kind of grayed like that, we can touch it. And you'll notice that the camera is going into sleep mode as I'm trying to show you what's going on. So I'm going to come into our menu and we're going to turn off some of the timers. So it's after 10 seconds, 30 seconds, it wants to go into sleep mode. and I'm trying to teach you guys, so I'm just going to turn that on to 15 minutes. So it'll stop doing that. So let's talk about the Q screen. We can access it here or by pressing the Q button here. And you'll notice that as soon as we do this, we get this orange highlight and all these different menu items in here that we can touch and change. There's different ways to navigate. We can use this little directional pad here. And when we have something selected, we can rotate our primary selector on top of the camera to change it immediately. Or we can touch on and then touch and drag to change our settings directly. So there's multiple ways to change our camera settings. And if we're using our normal camera controls, let's come down here, come back out, we leave. Sometimes you're going to see this little crescent-shaped orange icon. That refers to our primary control wheel. When I press and hold this AV button, we'll be talking about this in another lesson, we can change the other exposure setting. Let's cover each of these menu items real quick in the Q screen so you know what they are and what they do. Here's our shooting mode, shutter speed, aperture, which refers to the size of the opening of our lens. We have our ISO, we have our exposure compensation. This is flash exposure compensation, which is really flash brightness. We have our picture styles, white balance, we have our white balance shift, we have our auto light optimizer, metering mode, we have our focusing modes, we have our clusters, our focusing clusters, which are parallel to what we see in the viewfinder. We're talking about those quite a bit. We have our drive modes, which is what the camera does after we push the shutter button down all the way. And we also have our image quality. It's on S2 for some reason. Let's put this like this, and we're going to come back out, tap the shutter button, come into live view, and you'll notice that our number of shots remaining in our buffer changed significantly because we're using very, very small files under that S2 quality setting. When we go with full resolution, can't take as many images, and we don't have as deep a buffer. If we continue to press the information button, you can see that we have all these different icons on the left and right side of the screen. And again, we get this Q icon, which is telling us, and you'll notice that we have these gray highlights. Anything that's highlighted in gray means that we can touch it directly and make a change. To access the rest of these menu items, we have to press the Q button first. And essentially how this works is we get two columns, one on the far left and one on the far right, with the option to change that particular menu item on the bottom. So I'm going to walk you through each of these real quick. We have our focusing clusters, focusing mode, drive modes. We have our metering modes, image quality, white balance, picture styles, auto light optimizer, creative filters, and our aspect ratio. So as we're navigating through each of these, you can see that the options on the bottom of the screen are changing. Keep coming through. Not a huge fan of the creative filters and our aspect ratio. So if you wanted to change the focusing cluster you were using, we could come in here and select any of them. We can press the info button to enable eye detection. That's what this little icon means. We'll be talking about that in the focusing lesson. Very important for single shots versus sport shooting. We can talk about the drive modes real quick. There's actually more than this. Let's come out. Let's come back into our Q screen. And these are the same symbols. So when you see the symbol in the Q screen versus the overlay screen, they're the same thing. But let's talk about the drive modes real quick. It's what the camera does after we push the shutter button down all the way. We have a single frame. We have continuous shooting, which means the camera is going to keep on shooting, firing away, bam, 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 sports shooting, right? Silent single shooting, silent continuous shooting. We have a 10-second timer, a 2-second timer, and then we have a continuous shoot, which means that we can have a 10-second timer, and then we can determine the number of images the camera will take at the end of that timer. It'll be really good to get into the habit of becoming familiar with these icons in the Q screen and how they match up to these same icons in the live view shooting screen. This guy here is our Wi-Fi. And if I have enough time, I'll be thrilled to show you how to connect to your app. This is our Bluetooth activation indicator. It's turned off. We have the exposure simulation turned on, very important when we get into the exposure lesson. As I continue to press the info button, we get our histogram. We can make most of these things disappear, and then we're taken back to our main screen. Something I should point out is that when we rotate the power switch to the far right and select our video icon, we get a few different settings that we didn't see before. This is servo AF, which is the focusing system. That means the camera is focusing over and over and over again. We would simply press it to turn that off. You'll notice we have the video record icon up here. We have the number of hours we could record on the current setting. And when we come in to the Q menu on this overlay, this guy here is different. It's the movie resolution. And we have our 4K resolution down here in the bottom left-hand corner. As we scroll over, we can see the resolution. There's a crop that punches in. It actually uses a smaller part of the sensor, and the result is it zooms in. And then we have our full HD at 60 frames per second. We have full HD at 30 frames per second. And then we have different compression settings, which uses less file space at a lower quality. And then we have our 720. You'll notice that we have a limit of a record time of 30 minutes on each of these. Coming back out, we have digital zoom, the digital movie image stabilization. I would recommend turning that off. I'm not a huge fan of digital image stabilization. We have this little Photobook and a couple other settings. Let's come back to our regular shooting mode. I want to get into talking about some of the most important things you're going to do with your camera, which is changing your image brightness. Something very important to point out is we're going to do this in live view, and we have this indicator here that says exposure simulation. What that means is the camera is going to give us a prediction of how bright or dark the image will be before we take the picture. In certain shooting conditions, such as if you were to pick your flash up and to open it, you will notice that the exposure simulation is going to be turned off, and there's, I think, some of the creative modes it turns off. The scene modes, just depends on what you're shooting. But very important that as we go through this exercise that you can see what's going on here. The truth of the matter is there's only 2 or 3 modes that I really use when I'm shooting, with potentially a 4th. And that is aperture priority mode, manual mode, and video mode. By and large, this is what I teach my students to start with, is to start with aperture priority mode. Now the modes, what they do is it essentially tells the camera how much help to give us as we're shooting. In the very beginning, you may feel tempted to turn it to this green A+ sign. I refer to this lovingly as the dummy mode. It's just turning our camera basically into a point and shoot. We have some limited controls over here. We have some of these, basic settings where we're changing things brighter or darker this way. I think this is a dead end because we're not learning the structure in the fundamentals of photography, and we don't really understand what we're doing if we were to try to go this route. We can change some of our, our drive modes and things of that nature. But for the most part, this is a dead end. You spend a lot of money on this camera, and I want you to get the most bang for your buck out of it. So with that in mind, I would rather you start on either the P mode, which has some limitations as well. But if you really want to learn your camera, start off in the aperture priority mode, which is what AV stands for, aperture value. Aperture refers to the size of the opening of the lens. And so we're going to start talking about how the camera operates in aperture priority mode first, and we'll talk about some of these other modes. In the aperture priority mode, you'll notice that we're missing our shutter speed, and it's indicating that we can change our aperture by rotating our main dial or primary selector up here on top of the camera. So as I'm changing the size of this opening, you're going to notice that the overall brightness stays the same. That is impossible. If I'm changing the opening of the lens and I'm making it smaller and smaller, for example, this should be getting darker and darker. So something is definitely going on here. And what's happening is in aperture priority mode, we determine the aperture and the camera determines the shutter speed. And we can visualize this by tapping the shutter button. By the way, if you do not have your camera Go get your pause the video, go get your camera and follow along because this is some really important stuff. So if I tap the shutter button as I'm rotating, we can see the shutter speed indicated over here on the far left. So what's happening is that as we make the aperture smaller, the camera is using a longer and longer shutter speed. It's letting in more light to compensate for this. When I open up the aperture, make it wider, the camera begins to use a faster shutter speed. So the camera is constantly trying to balance what the setting should be. As a professional, I use aperture priority mode a lot, especially when I'm short on time. As a wedding photographer, we would be shooting inside of a chapel. Now we're in the lobby, and now we're outdoors, and that's 3 different lighting conditions in 15 seconds. And I'm looking where I'm stepping, and here comes the bride and the groom, and I'm trying to, get focus on them and compose them. And I don't want to think about changing my shutter speed. Sports shooters are the same way. If they have clouds or it's changing lighting conditions, they would rather turn that over to the camera. So there are times that you will use aperture priority mode a lot. So the question then becomes, if the camera is changing the shutter speed to get this even exposure, how do we change image brightness? So let's take a picture, and we can even touch on the center to get focus on the center. We can play it back, and let's pretend that this image is too dark and we want to make it brighter. There's a short answer to this, and there's a long answer to this. The short answer is we are going to use this tool called exposure compensation. We can access it directly by pressing the exposure compensation bar, and you'll see something similar in the viewfinder on the bottom there. So as we touch and drag our finger, you'll notice the screen brightness is changing. So this diamond home plate 0 is a neutral even exposure. And when I come to 1, essentially what we're doing is we're doubling the amount of light coming into the viewfinder. So if I were to take a picture from here and play that back and compare those 2 images, you can see that the first one's darker and the second one's a little bit brighter. Tap my shutter button, come back here, go even a little bit brighter. So I want you to do this exercise. I want you to practice doing this. Take a picture, come into your exposure compensation bar. If it's too bright, we can go in the opposite direction. Take a picture here. And when we come back and we play these back, you'll notice that the brightness is changing. So if this is the only thing that you get from this video, changing your brightness in aperture priority mode, you will have learned a ton, and you are well on your way. Practice this skill set of changing how bright or how dark your image is. Now, there are a couple side notes I have to give you, and I talk more about this on my photography courses, is that the shutter speed you're using is important. You have to keep an eye on it. And the short answer is 1/60th of a second. If you're handheld shooting, that is the slowest or the longest shutter speed that you want. Otherwise, your pictures are going to be blurry. And even 1/60th of a second, it may not be fast enough. In some cases, 1/100th of a second may be better. If you're shooting a moving athlete who's running, you're going to need a much faster shutter speed, maybe 1/500th of a second, or even faster, 1/1000th, maybe 1/2000th. It just really depends on how fast your subject's moving. One of the most common mistakes that beginners use is they're unaware of their settings, and they get into a situation where they're shooting and they're using very slow shutter speeds. And so the pictures are blurry because the camera is open for a long period of time. We don't get that sharp, crisp image projection on our sensor. We get, this long delayed image that's kind of scrolled across the sensor, and that's why it's so blurry. So what I do in aperture priority mode is I'm constantly tapping my shutter button and I'm sneaking a peek over here at the shutter speed. Always want that to be 1/60th of a second or faster. So in this particular situation where I've turned my ISO down, you'll notice that the shutter speed got longer. It's like 1/10 or 1/20th. And as we increase our ISO, the shutter speed is getting faster. So what this means is that we have an indirect way to control the shutter speed in aperture priority mode by using our ISO. So if you're sneaking a peek and you're seeing that shutter speed's too long or too it's just open way too long, bump up your ISO. That's the short answer. There is also a long answer to this exposure compensation that I would like to demonstrate. And this is what I'd like to get into a little bit more in my advanced courses is why is this happening with our camera? Something I want you to do is take your hand and move it in front of the lens and watch what happens to the shutter speed. So what's happening is the camera is constantly making measurements in real time in terms of how much light is entering the lens. I'm going to turn my ISO down just a little bit here. Let's see if we can get a nice even number. Okay. 1/160th of a second at an even exposure. So when we come in here and we go to +1, look what happens to the shutter speed. 1/80th of a second. If we sit down and do the math, 1/160th plus 1/160th is 2/160ths, which, when we round it out, is 1/80th of a second. So we're literally doubling the shutter speed. And that is why, when we look at this exposure compensation bar, we can say every stop is twice the amount of light. In an aperture priority mode, this is happening by shutter speed. We don't see it happening because it's turned off. So let me ask you this. If we're at 1/80th of a second and we want to make this brighter, what do you think it would be at +2? Twice the amount of light. We're at 1, it was 1/80th of a second. What do you think it'll be at 2? 1/80th plus 1/80th is 2/80ths, which is 1/40th of a second. And that is how exposure compensation works. And for the bonus question, what do you think another stop would be? Think about it, do the math. 1/40th plus 1/40th is 2/40ths, 1/20th of a second. This is how exposure compensation is working. It works in the other direction as well. If we're at 1/160th and we decide to lose half as much light, what do you think it'll be? If you said 1/320th and so on and so forth, that's what all this means. And you're going to see a similar exposure compensation bar in the viewfinder. And you don't always have to add one full stop. These are 1/3 stop increments. We can just add 1/3. This is more common, that I would bump it up 1 or 2/3 stops, and I would shoot at that, for the entire shoot. Now, I know I've been doing this on the back monitor, but there is a more ergonomic way to do it. I've done it so I can show you what's going on. As you're looking through the viewfinder and shooting, you're not going to want to pull your eye away and fiddle back here. So the way this is done through the viewfinder is by using the exposure compensation button right here. And you can see it also says AV. But this symbol here, this ± sign, that is exposure compensation. That means brighter or darker. Looking through the viewfinder, we press and hold it down, and then we can rotate our main command dial. And that is how we would adjust that same setting when shooting through the optical viewfinder. Simply push this and rotate it. Talk about the manual mode in a second. So that is aperture priority. I know I've spent a lot of time on that, but it's going to give you a solid foundation for changing your image brightness in shooting in most situations. I probably use it like 80% of the time. Let's take a look at TV, which stands for time value. And you'll notice that now we have the shutter speed highlighted and the aperture is missing. It's telling us that we can rotate our primary selector. This is why I call it the primary selector, as our numero uno, number one finger, is changing the main setting for that mode. In the aperture priority mode, it's the aperture. In the shutter priority mode, it's the shutter speed. So in this case, we change the shutter speed and the camera changes the aperture. So as we rotate this dial, you can see the aperture automatically changing. If we were to do the same hand test and move it in front, we can see the aperture changing again. I don't really use shutter priority mode, but for some people, it's easier just to dial in our shutter speed and to shoot. If they're thinking, hey, I want to keep it handheld. What the problem will be, what you will run into, is that when you get into the faster shutter speeds, the camera will be unhappy and it'll start blinking its aperture at you. It's saying, I'm not happy. I can't make this work. And what it's saying is the limit of the lens has been exceeded. The lens cannot open wider. And this is what it's trying to tell us. So let's say we were at a sporting event, our kid's soccer game, indoors. And we're shooting at 1/500th of a second, and you run into this situation. What are you going to do? Think about it for just a second. And if you said, bump up your ISO, you are absolutely correct. You can see it getting brighter and brighter. Let's see what happens here. I tap the shutter button and the blinking has stopped. The camera says this is going to be bright enough and we're going to be good to go. In a perfect world, you would have a lens that has a wider aperture, like a 2.8 lens. So I'm demonstrating with a kit lens, but you're going to be running into these situations where you don't have enough light and you got to bump your exposure up. But it's essentially the same as aperture priority. It's just we're flipping which one we control and which one the camera takes over. So in shutter priority mode, we dial in the shutter speed and the camera handles the aperture. Shifts and exposure compensation will take place with the aperture. So there's a 4.5 aperture and there's a 5.0. So that is what's going on. If we were to demonstrate it this way, you can see it's compensating with the lens. Let's talk about program mode. Program mode is like a glorified version of dummy mode. And there is actually a time that is pretty handy. If you are shooting like a wedding, like you're at the reception or a party, and you have a speed light or a flash that you're using, program mode typically is the easiest one to use, because what happens is when we go into a flash mode, the camera is going to use a shutter speed that is fast enough, usually, to shoot handheld, 1/60th of a second. It's very hard to force this to use very long shutter speeds. It doesn't want to do it when the flash is up. And so a lot of people don't know that. Yeah, program mode in Canon cameras is the handheld flash mode. As soon as we shut this guy, we're down to 1/20th of a second. So that is what's going on with program mode with flash, but for the most part, I don't really use it. We can change our exposure compensation. The way the camera handles this is differently. It kind of changes both. So I'm going to push and hold the exposure compensation. And you can see that both the shutter speed and the aperture are going to change. And this is the heart of the matter with program mode, is the camera comes up with these different combinations and we don't always have perfect control over them. So sometimes it's kind of random. You can definitely change your shutter speed and aperture by rotating the primary control wheel in program mode. But the camera is going to come up with these funky combinations. And this is one of the most common problems I see with beginners in shooting in program mode, is they'll shoot at something like this. And they're wondering why their pictures are blurry. It's because the shutter speed was too long. See, the camera corrected it. It's interesting that Canon does this. Typically, it leaves it locked in. So what I think is happening here is Canon is trying to give you a relatively fast shutter speed, just depending on what your ISO is. If we turn it down, let's see if we can force it. Yeah, you can force it with a lower ISO. But again, I'm not a huge fan of program mode, and that's why I say stick with aperture priority. Let's come in and take a look at manual mode. Manual mode is amazing because we determine everything. The camera is not going to change our ISO, our shutter speed, or our aperture. Everything we dial in, the camera will respect, and that's where it's going to stay. So if you wanted a shutter speed of 1/100th of a second, we can open up our aperture, we can bump up our ISO, and the camera is not going to change anything. It's just going to respect that. And at this point, the exposure compensation bar on the bottom really becomes a metering bar. And what it's telling us is how bright or how dark the image is going to be. Do you remember when we were talking about the exposure compensation button here, looking through the viewfinder? The reason why this says AV is because in the manual mode, this is going to change our aperture. So as we push this, now we can come in and dial our aperture in. And when we lift it, we come back to our shutter speed. So that is how we do the manual control settings. Shutter speed, aperture, ISO. Typically, the manual mode I use for strobe shooting, if I'm in a studio. If I have enough time to tweak and dial my settings in, I'll shoot in manual mode. I prefer to shoot in manual mode when I can, but sometimes I just don't have enough time. So I look at the modes as tools, not so much an indication of how good of a photographer I'm. It's like a hammer does one thing, a saw does something else, and that's how you should determine when you're using one mode or over another. So we've talked about a lot there. I know we've talked about the different modes. We've talked about changing our exposure settings. We've talked about changing our shutter speed, our aperture, and our ISO, how to make our images brighter or darker. Very important foundational shooting techniques, and that is exposure control with our different modes. There are a couple other modes I want to point out while we're here. We have the scene modes, which I also recommend staying away from. If you dial into SCN and you come up to this, there are actually a couple of useful ones in here. But what Canon's trying to do is allow you to pick a circumstance, and they're going to do all the other settings for you. The problem with this is those settings may not be great. Okay, so if you're shooting sports and you're having a hard time, you can come into scene mode, macro, food. This guy down here, the HDR, is a little bit useful. I sometimes use it in certain situations. There's a handheld night scene that's going to take multiple images. There's a long exposure for flash scenes, night portraits. But this is really the only one I ever use because this is where we get the 3 consecutive shots for HDR and it combines them. But for the most part, I don't use the scene modes and I don't recommend them. Coming over to the filter mode, these little filters, they're kind of gimmicky. You can see, what they do. Some more HDR settings. We have 4 different HDR settings, and these apply a certain look to it. Some of them are like really popped colors, really bold colors, or embossed. Never been a fan of the embossed one. Sometimes maybe the art standard, but I will demonstrate this on the full crash course and show you the differences between the HDRs in a sunset shooting condition. Miniature effects, pretty cool if you got cars and buildings in it and you're backed up. And the rest of these are kind of gimmicky. Never really use them. The last mode, obviously, you should be aware of is the video mode. As soon as we go into the video mode, depending on our resolution, we're at 4K here, so it's punching in. I think full HD is fine if you're doing, YouTube stuff or basic casual stuff. There's a time and place for 4K, but I think full HD is fine. And the tracking in those modes are really good. And we'll be talking about all kinds of video features on the crash course. I show you all the different techniques, the focusing. The main thing in terms of exposure settings is you want to use a shutter speed that is twice the frame rate of your frames per second. So if I'm shooting at, let's come down to, for the sake of simplicity, 30 frames per second, I'm basically doubling that to say 60. So I want to be shooting at a shutter speed of 1/60th of a second. And right now it's locking me out because I'm not in the manual mode. We're going to flip this over down to the manual mode. Almost always shooting in either manual or aperture priority modes for video. If I'm in a studio, it's definitely manual mode, but this would be set to 60. So 30 frames per second, 1/60th. I could also come in and, auto ISO. Yeah, we got to talk about auto ISO. This is typically how I would shoot in a studio, where I would dial in my shutter speed first, the aperture I want, and then I adjust the ISO. Let's talk about auto ISO real quick. Let's come back to our stills mode. Auto ISO tells the camera to handle the ISO setting. This can be pretty powerful for certain kinds of indoor sports photography, where we say we need 1/500th of a second. We need a certain aperture, but the lights might be changing from second to second. There's a lot of strobes and there's all kinds of different lighting systems, and we don't want the camera over or under exposing. So what we could do is we put it on auto ISO, and the camera would be measuring in real time how much light's coming in, and it would change the ISO accordingly. Some people love it, some people hate it. I only use it in very specific types of shooting situations like the one I mentioned, but it's another tool in the toolbox, and that is auto ISO. I don't really use it as much shooting video, but you could. And in coming back into video, if I am going from very bright to very dark situations, I'd be more likely to shoot in aperture priority mode and let the camera adjust from those settings. Otherwise, I'm in manual mode almost all the time. A lot of information, but those are the shooting modes and exposure control. Talk about our camera's focusing systems. With a modern DSLR, this can be very confusing because there's different ways to focus, either through the optical viewfinder, which allows us to see in real time through the lens by a mirror and a pentaprism that's built into the camera up here. Every time we push a shutter button down, that mirror flips up, exposes the sensor, and takes a picture. But there's also a dedicated focusing array just below that mirror. And so the focusing systems through the optical viewfinder are very different than the focusing systems we see in live view. So I have to teach this to you in two different lessons. For the sake of simplicity, I am going to teach you the focusing systems in live view first, and then we'll talk about the focusing systems looking through the optical viewfinder. So we're going to come into live view, and we're going to break this down into the how, the when, and the where the camera is focusing. How, when, and where. If you think of it in those terms, this is going to be easy. So the first question is, how does the camera focus? On most modern cameras, pushing the shutter button halfway down will engage the camera's focusing systems. Pushing it down all the way will take the picture. That's the short answer. Halfway shutter button depression, very important to teach ourselves to feel where that focus point is. So let's talk about the when, which is the camera's focusing modes. There are some things in here that are confusing. One shot means the camera is going to get focus lock one time, and as long as we hold the shutter button halfway down, focus will not change. That means we can get focus lock and we can recompose. This is a technique that I demonstrate on the crash course. Very useful when shooting certain kinds of portraits. You'll also notice that we hear a beep and the box is green when we get focus lock. Servo's a little bit different because you'll notice we no longer get a beep and the box is now blue. Servo is a continuous autofocus, which means that instead of happening just one time, focus is happening over and over and over again. There is no focus lock in AI servo mode. And even if we keep that shutter button halfway down, the camera is updating it over and over and over again. This is ideal for sports shooting. Something to point out that you can touch on the screen and revert back to one shot. So green is one shot, blue is AI servo when we're in that mode. So this is our camera's focusing modes, whether it's a one-time focus or whether it's a continuous over and over and over again focus. Now let's talk about the where, which is our camera's focusing clusters. There are a number of different clusters in live view, the most forward of which I believe is single point AF. We can just touch on the screen. We can move it around using our directional pad, put it over the subject we want to get focus on, and we almost get edge-to-edge coverage, almost. Let's see if we can toggle some of this off. See how close to the edge we can get. Nearly completely from top to bottom, and just a little bit of the sides is not covered. Let's come back in and take a look at the spot AF, which is a smaller, more precise square. This might be better for shooting macro, where you have to have very precise focus lock. Interesting. Let's come in and look at the zone mode. The zone, as you can see, is going to be a larger square, and we can move that around by touching it on the viewfinder. We can also move it by touching on the directional pad. Probably going to be better for tracking maybe moving subjects, maybe not super fast moving subjects, but if you have a kid running around perhaps. And you can see that the green squares are indicating exactly where it's looking. Typically the camera wants to find an area of contrast, and that's what it dials in on. Let's come back to one of the most powerful tools in the camera, I believe, for face and eye detection, which is this guy right here. Face, you can see this little face icon plus tracking. There's a number of great tools in here. When we do not have a human face, this is going to become a tracking tool. You can see we get these little white dots. It's turned off. And this guy here is saying that if we want to turn it off, we can do so. But the camera is trying to track that target, even in an autofocus single, and we can engage it. If we wanted to do it with servo, come in here, just try it this way. Pretty great for tracking a moving subject. This is going to be a little bit more useful in the video mode, which I will demonstrate. Let's go back to one shot. So let me put a picture of a face up, and I'll show you some of the face and eye detection methods. So here we have a handsome model who has volunteered to help us. We are going to make sure we have our face detection on. And you can see that the camera is automatically recognizing it and tracking it over this target here. If we wanted to track a different subject, we could still, select it. Tap on the face that you want. Very awesome for shooting portraits. So let's talk about a more powerful tool for portrait shooting, and that is eye detection. So when you are in the cluster selection icon and you have face detection on, we have this info, which is giving us access to eye detection. So we're going to enable that. And you can see we get this little box here over our model's left eye. This is extremely powerful when shooting portraits, and we have a wide aperture lens because the camera is going to do most of the heavy lifting to get that eye in focus. When we shoot portrait, we want one of those eyes in focus. Much harder to do that with a wide aperture lens looking through the viewfinder because the position of our focusing squares are limited. We get far greater coverage here. So this is one of those instances that maybe the back monitor is better to shoot portraits. Why? Because we have eye detection. That is face and eye detection. Very powerful if you're shooting with wide aperture lenses, doing portraits, and I'll be demonstrating how to maximize this in the full crash course for the SL3. So we've talked about the how, we've talked about the when, and we've talked about the where when we're using our camera's auto focusing systems in live view for stills. It's a lot of information, right? There are also some pretty cool tools that we can use for manual focus. And I want to point out a couple of these real quick. If we come into the deep menu, red tab, page 7, tell you what, come to page 6. A lot of these are similar to what we've accessed in the Q menu. There's another feature in here called continuous autofocus. I recommend leaving it turned off, but if you turn this on, what the camera is going to do is going to be continually focusing whether we engage the focusing systems or not. So if I take my hand and put my hand in front of it, I'm not touching the camera, it's focusing on my hand. This can be useful in some situations, but the reason I don't like it is because the camera is constantly focusing on things that I don't want, and it drains the battery faster, so I'm not a huge fan of that. Let me demonstrate some of the techniques that we can use in manual focus. So I'm going to come and pick a regular focusing square, and on my lens switch, I'm going to flip this from autofocus to manual. So we lose our focusing square, right? Notice that this button here is the cluster selector. I'll be talking about this more when we talk about the optical viewfinder. And next to that, there's this little blue magnifying glass. So I can push that and zoom in. And so I get a magnified view. And in manual focus, I can rotate my manual focus ring, which is on the very front of the 18 to 55, depending on which one you have. And I can dial in precise focus lock. If I go back into autofocus, the focusing ring doesn't do anything. We can zoom out by pressing the same button again. We can use this magnifying tool when autofocus is engaged. However, rotating the manual focus ring on a lens doesn't do anything, and we would need to flip that switch over, and now we can engage it. Something else I need to demonstrate is something referred to as peaking. And we see this on page 7, go to the red tab, peaking settings. MF stands for manual focusing. So when we turn this to on, we have the ability to see either red, yellow, or blue in areas of a high contrast. So what peaking does, we can't see it when we zoom in, but what peaking does is it allows us to see where the camera is focusing. This can be very useful in certain kinds of landscape shooting. There's the blue. We can come in. I can go to red. See what that looks like. And it's a great manual focusing tool, especially when shooting video and you kind of got to get an idea. Sometimes with very wide apertures, it's not super precise, but it is definitely something that you should keep in the back of your mind if you need this as a tool. And I'm going to turn that off, flip my lens switch back to autofocus so we can talk about some of the focusing modes in video. So video is a little bit different simply because we have, let me toggle the info screen, servo AF. And what this means is the camera is going to focus wherever this autofocus point is. So if I put my hand in front here, there it goes, it's locking on. If I take it away, it's focusing on the screen. There are some pretty cool tools that we can do here. Let me set up a different target. So even within the last few years, we used to need special tools to change focus during video, where we'd have these gears and these wheels and we'd have somebody operating. And with the Canon 70D was when I decided this was amazing, that we can just touch on the screen now and we can change our focus and direct the attention of our viewers. So you can do some pretty incredible focusing things just using this touch monitor and not have to buy all this extra gear or have somebody there to do it. Sometimes this isn't going to be needed, and so we can turn that off. And when we change the focusing square here, we can still engage it, but we do so by pushing the shutter button. Some people don't like doing that, but at least we have more precise control over it. And this is a tool you should definitely be aware of. Again, we can go into our peaking. If you want to see what this looks like, it's on a slightly different page in video. Down here, turn it on, and we could see where our focusing is. Pretty nice. We have our zoom tools. If we wanted to zoom in and use manual focus, we could do that as well. It's called manual zoom focusing. Even look at that. Look how close we can get. You can see the texture of the gaffer's tape. Come back out. Some other tools I need to demonstrate in video is when we come into our focusing clusters, we have face detection again. So if you're doing vlogging and you're moving around and you want the camera to focus on our face, very powerful to go with face detection. We lose dual pixel autofocus in 4K mode, but in the standard high def, we have it, and it is very good. It's very accurate. It's very precise. It's among the very best. Canon is known for dual pixel autofocus. So again, different strategies for different focusing tools. We have our spot AF, our zone, and a single square again. But video is a little bit different because we're dealing with a constant moving picture. And sometimes we may want the camera to do some of that heavy lifting for us. So we've talked about a lot of the different focusing systems in live view. Having said all of that information about live view focusing, I need to talk about focusing through the optical viewfinder, which is a completely different ballgame. To demonstrate this, I'm going to use the back monitor and explain how it's going to mirror what you see through the viewfinder. So we're going to turn this over to a manual shooting mode. We're going to go back into our stills. Many of the rules still apply. So the focusing modes, one shot versus servo, it still applies. And you can even see right here is we get this little cluster indicator. It's telling us which of our focusing clusters are available looking through the viewfinder. So if you take your camera and you look through your viewfinder and you press this top right hand button, the focus cluster selector, you are going to see a red highlight on either one or several of these 9 focusing squares. The middle square is more precise. That is referred to as a cross type focusing point. It's going to be more accurate. And the others around it are still phase detection. They're very good. So what I want you to do is, looking through the viewfinder, having pressed the focus cluster button, I want you to rotate your primary selector and watch how that red dot moves from square to square in a circle, basically. What that tells you is which of those focusing points are active. So if you only have one square active, that means that is where the camera is going to be focusing in terms of selecting the cluster. If you have all of the squares in red and highlighted, as demonstrated this back thing, what that's telling the camera to do is to make the selection for you. It's going to find a subject of contrast, and it will determine from those 9 squares which square it should focus on. So if they're all red, it's automatic selection. If you have one point selected, it is going to be that square only. The optical focusing systems are going to be superior for sports shooting. Trust me on this. We get 5 frames per second. It's going to be far more accurate. You're going to get a lot more keepers. So for sports shooting, definitely revert to optical viewfinder. And I'll be talking about sports shooting in the main crash course and how to get the most out of the camera. Another thing I need to point out, in the bottom right-hand corner, you're going to see a green dot that lights up when you get focus lock in one shot. That's what that little circle means. So I know I've talked about a lot of information about focusing, and I hope that gets you started. Just know that your subject matter is going to determine which of those tools are best for the job. Let's talk about our camera's white balance. There is a short answer to this, and there is a much longer answer to this. I'm going to try to give you the short answer. If you are shooting primarily JPEGs, this is going to be more important. If you shoot raw images, it's not going to be as important because RAW captures all of the original color information. JPEGs is much smaller amount, maybe 20% of the original RAW file. So if we're recording video or if we're shooting JPEGs, this is going to be more important. If you're a pure beginner, here's the short answer. Shoot on auto white balance. Canon's auto white balance is pretty good. I think it's among the very best. I think the colors look great. If you are shooting and your auto white balance is off, what you will notice is the camera or the images will have a blue or a yellow hue to them. Okay, so when you see that, then we need to come in and start adjusting our white balance, which you'll notice we select right here. We have it on the bottom of the screen. And the way this works is our eyes are really good at adjusting in different kinds of lights. Cameras are not as good. We have to kind of tell it what light we're using. So we have a sun icon. If you're shooting outdoors and it's bright and sunny, try the sun icon. If you're in shade, there's a different icon for this. There's cloud cover. There's tungsten light. Look how blue it is. There's white fluorescent light. We have white balance for flash. And then we have a custom white balance that I'll demonstrate in just a second. That's the short answer. And you'll notice that we have some options here. We can use an ambient white balance, auto white balance, or more of a cool auto white balance. I like the cooler look a little bit more myself. Lighting conditions where we might have a tungsten light or a daylight balanced light. The camera is going to struggle. It's not going to really know what the correct color temperature is. When I say color temperature, I mean white light is from a given source. For example, tungsten. See how blue this is? So when you get into those situations, something that we can do is we can use our custom white balance. And in this particular setting, what we do is we tell the camera what white is. Here it is. So custom white balance, page 4. It wants to see a picture of something that's all white. Here it is. I'm going to hit set. It's going to say, do you want to use this image for custom white balance? Yes. Make sure that we're now on the custom icon. There's so many different places to access the same information. This is the deep menu version. And now, even in mixed lighting conditions, this should be a perfect white balance. So if you're in a situation like that and you need to deal with mixed lighting conditions, this is the best way to do it. Some cameras have something called a Kelvin setting, where we can dial in the specific Kelvin temperature for it. We don't have that on the SL3, but for the most part, this is going to cover a lot of ground. You've got a lot of firepower in terms of the color science on Canon cameras. I think Canon's color science is the best. Let's talk about our camera's metering modes. I'm going to put the camera into manual to demonstrate this, and I have a headlamp set up here. And when you remembered in the aperture priority mode, when I was putting my hand in front of the camera and the shutter speed was changing and the light was changing, what's happening there is the camera is measuring light as it's hitting the sensor. The camera metering modes are the patterns or the shapes of light the camera uses to measure. The easiest way to explain this is to talk about it in the spot metering mode. So you'll notice that the screen got really dark there. So I'm in aperture priority mode, and we have this circle. It's kind of hard to see because it's over the bright light. But as I move that off of the bright light, suddenly the camera becomes bright again. So what's happening? This circle is where the camera is looking. And so when it's on the blinds, it's giving us a recommended exposure. And then at the moment we move over that bright light, it says, hey, this is really, really bright. You're going to need a faster shutter speed. And that's how the metering modes work. It's the shapes and patterns the camera is using to measure light. In the spot metering mode, it's this little teeny circle here. It's very small. And then we have a partial metering mode, which expands that area a little bit more. We have a center weighted, which expands it a little bit more. And then we have an evaluative, which is really framed, from side to side of the frame, and it uses some other metrics of measurement. Typically, the evaluative metering mode is where I tell beginners to start, and occasionally I use some center weighted if I'm shooting into backlight, or sometimes spot. So center weighted, if I was shooting a portrait and I had very bright highlights in the corners, we'd be telling the camera to ignore the corners and just basically look in here. So that is how we tell the camera where to measure light from. It's the camera's metering modes. When we come into our quick menu, I want to show you something we haven't really talked about. It's these two guys over here, which is our picture styles and our auto light optimizer. The picture styles I like to think of as recipes that take raw data as it's hitting the sensor, and these recipes are telling the processor what to keep, how they should make the JPEGs. In the beginning, this first one here, this auto, is going to be fine, or standard even. Either one of these are going to be fine. And there's a portrait you can come through. So we got landscape, fine detail, neutral, faithful, black and white. We have user defined ones where we can create our own and save them. And there's more going on here than some of the metrics I'm about to show you. So for example, if you wanted to get more accurate flesh tones, you would pick portrait, and that picture style is designed for shooting people. If you wanted more vivid blues and greens, you might select landscape. And there are some settings in there specifically for landscapes beyond these metrics I'm about to show you. But when we come in and we press the info button for each of these, we have the ability to move these sliders back and forth. I don't recommend doing this for beginning or intermediate photographers. Videographers, advanced shooters, they do it all the time, and there's certain reasons for it. But let's just go through these real quick. Come in here. The sharpness in terms of the strength, the detail of the sharpness, threshold, we have contrast, saturation, and color tone. And so you can come in here and tweak these to your heart's content. I just don't recommend doing it in the beginning. The other set of information that we're dealing with is the auto light optimizer, which is going to give us some adjustments to the contrast. Again, this is only applying to our JPEG files, and we also get this option here, allows us to disable it during manual exposure, and we can turn it off altogether. We have different strengths here on the bottom. We have our aspect ratios. You can see this cropping. It's going to 16:9 is cinema, 1:1 for Instagram. If you wanted to shoot in the Instagram format, you could. I don't really recommend changing these because we can always, crop in post. And then this setting over here is our image quality, whether we're shooting in JPEG, which is designated with a letter. L is for large. We get the resolution, 24 megapixels. Medium is 11 megapixels. You can see it's smaller. And then we have our small files, which are really teeny tiny. If we wanted to access RAW, we would push the info button. See how it says that right there, info? And we can access compact RAW. It's a little bit smaller, supposedly retains all the information as well. But there is a time to choose RAW, and there's a time to shoot JPEG, and there's a lot of discussion in terms of when and why. These are tools. These are tools for the job that you will determine whether to use or not. I talk a lot about this on the full crash course and some of the philosophies of use, when you would want one over the other, things of that nature. Looking in here, we also have our filter settings. I'm turning it over to the creative filters, and you can see we have them here on the bottom where we can scroll through them. These are the same as the ones I showed you when we were talking about the mode dial. Let's talk about our camera's deep menu systems, which can be accessed by pressing the menu button. To navigate I think Canon's menu systems are wonderful. I think they're the best. So in terms of navigation, you'll notice that we have these tabs at the very top. We can't really navigate them with the directional pad, but we can touch on them with our finger, and they have different colors. Red is for shooting, blue is for playback. We have this purple, which is dealing with our Wi-Fi connection. We have yellow, which is the camera settings. This aqua color is how those menus are displayed. We turn those off as soon as we turn the camera on, is the first thing we did. And then we have our My Menu tab. In the SL3 crash course, we go through everything comprehensively. I make my recommendations, what you should change, what you should not. I'm going to make the most important ones here. A quick overview. If I spent, as much time as I'd want, this would be a 2.5-hour video. So we're going to kind of come through these quickly. Just keep in mind that a lot of the important stuff is in the red tab for shooting. We have our image quality, where you can select versus RAW or JPEG. We can see that we have this primary selector here on the top and arrows on the bottom. So we can simultaneously shoot RAW and JPEG, no problem. When we scroll over the JPEG, you can see the resolution changing. Let's get the RAW off. In the number of shots remaining. If we have RAW, which are obviously larger file sizes, you can see how quickly our file space runs out. RAW retains all of the original data, color information. It's going to allow you to do a lot of processing. You're going to get more dynamic range. You're going to get better color. My rule of thumb is for important professional shoots, shoot as RAW as much as you can. Mixed lighting conditions, I'm shooting RAW. If I'm shooting an event, sport shooting event, or maybe a party where I'm taking thousands of images, or it's not, super important, I'll shoot JPEG for workflow reasons. But again, we'll talk more about this on the crash course. We'll hit OK, come back out. The aspect ratio we talked about. A lot of this stuff is, we can access through the Q menu, and so there's some duplicate things in here. How long do you want the image to be reviewed? Would you like to release the shutter without a card? Sometimes you might want to turn this off. Lens aberration correction deals with the lens talking to the camera and telling it what flaws it has built in. Peripheral illumination correction is a vignetting in the corners. We see it in very wide angle lenses. This is why sometimes when we adapt lenses over, they perform differently if they're made by a different manufacturer. Canon is using software to clean up the flaws of the lens. We can have some distortion correction if we turn this on, and digital lens optimizer as well. So there's tons of bonus features when we use Canon lenses on Canon camera bodies. In the crash course, we have an entire lesson on using the flash system, which is it can really save you sometimes. It's not the best, but I also talk about using an external speed light. The drive modes, we've talked about this already. What does the camera do when we push the shutter button down all the way? We have our timers, our bursts. We have our exposure compensation bar. Again, we can change it here just by moving the slider left to right. There's a bonus feature in the menu, however, when we rotate our primary selector and we get these tick marks breaking off. This is referred to as bracketing. Essentially, we're telling the camera to take 3 images, which is visualized with these tick marks. 2 stops underexposed, an even exposure, and then 2 stops overexposed. We can also shift that bracket left and right. And I usually demonstrate this on the crash course as well. When you're dealing with very bright lights and dark shadows, that's the time you want to do it. We have our ISO speed settings where we can select our ISO speed. We can also select the maximum when we're using auto ISO. Auto light optimizer we talked about. Highlight tone priority, I usually leave mine turned off. And what this does is it allows the camera to shift in favor of highlights that are blown out to recapture some of those details. The reason why I turn it off is because I like to control what's going on with my details and highlights. I don't like the camera doing it when it thinks it should or not. We have our metering modes. The metering timer has to do with how long the exposure settings are being displayed. So if I tap the shutter button, it's this thing right here, watch, it'll turn off after 4 seconds. There it goes. So if you want to leave those up longer, you can come in here and turn them on for minutes at a time. White balance and custom white balance we talked about. White balance shift, this is a different place that we can do it. Color space should be sRGB unless you're shooting for a magazine. In that case, you're familiar with Adobe RGB. Picture styles, again, this is a different place that we can come in here and tweak them. We have our user defined, which means that we can have, our own recipes there, so to speak. Exposure noise reduction is anything over a second. So if we have this on auto, the camera will help clean this up a little bit. We have our high ISO noise reduction. This again applies to JPEGs. I would recommend turning it on. Dust delete data is something in my, how many years have I been shooting now? 16, 17 years of shooting. I've never used it. It's a software solution to clean up images that have sensor dust on them. The better way to do this is just to practice clean sensor hygiene. Be careful about how you change your lenses. I also demonstrate how to clean your sensor on the full crash course. We can control whether the touch shutter, touching the monitor, is active or not. Our focusing modes. We have our clusters, eye detection, continuous autofocus. We talked about all these in the focusing lessons. This is the when, this is the where, and this is great for portraits. Not a huge fan of continuous autofocus because of battery drain. Lens electronic manual focus is when we're using lenses that are electronically controlling manual focus. What do we want it to do when using one shot? I demonstrated that it was turned off in one shot, but if you wanted to have manual focus after enabling one shot, you could come in here and turn this on. Something else you'll notice is that when we change menu items, it gives us a little blue highlight to help us know if we maybe mess something up. Autofocus assist beam firing refers to speed lights, and for the most part, I recommend leaving it on. It's going to flash this little assist beam that's going to allow the camera to focus a little bit easier. And then we have our manual focus peaking settings, which we demonstrated. And that's just the red tab. That's where the bulk of the most important stuff is. In our playback, this deals with how we play images. We can protect the images by selecting them individually, within a range, in a folder. We can protect all of them on a card, and the way it works is we come in and we have this key icon that when we press the set button, we see that key icon, that is going to prevent us from deleting an image accidentally. Now if you format your memory card, it's going to be gone, but if you're deleting a bunch of them, it will protect it. And I usually do not delete lots of images off the back of my camera. I do if I know I screwed something up. But I like to, if it's 50-50 or I'm not sure, I like to see it. I like to process it a little bit. I like to look at it before I make that decision. We can select by a range of images. So we can come in here and select all of them or deselect them. In the folder, and the rest of this is pretty self-explanatory. I really don't use it a whole lot. We can rotate an image if we wanted to by pressing the set button. I like for the camera to do this automatically. Obviously, we can erase images by coming in here and selecting them. I think sometimes people get into a habit of not downloading their images. So you should be downloading your images after every shoot and backing them up. So I have friends that they'll have big memory cards and they'll kind of keep all their images on one card, and they're deleting to make space, and that's just not the way to do it. Back up your images onto your computer, put them in two different places, preferably one on the cloud, one on a hard drive, and then erase and reformat your memory cards. But we can select and erase images through a range if you wanted to do that. Obviously I don't want to erase these. On the folder, on the card. The print order allows us to connect to a printer or computer, and we can select which images we want to print. And I've never used this simply because many printers have memory cards, or there's easier ways to get files to be printed up, and get a card reader. You spend all this money on a camera, don't treat it like a card reader, a $10 or $15 card reader. So I've never used this. Photobook setup. This allows us to select images to be used in a photo book. Something else I've never used. We have our creative filters here where we can apply the filters to existing images. These are these kind of gimmicky filters that I talked about earlier. Never use it. Another one I never use. There's a lot in here I never use. The creative assist So if you want to come in here and play with these different settings and filters, it's essentially presets where we can come in and say, hey, let's apply it. Let's make it darker or brighter, things of that nature. And when you come in here and tweak something like, I don't know, something like this, and we hit the cluster button, it will save it as a new file. So it allows us to do some minimal processing in camera, color tones, things of that nature. I don't see this as a serious tool. We get these different filters in here, tons of them. Take a look at it, play around with it. But again, most of that can be done in post on Photoshop. Red eye correction. So if you have somebody with red eyes, you can select an image and try to remove it. Create an album. If I don't remember this correctly, this takes little snippets of video clips and assembles them. So I don't have any in there, but never use it. Cropping, never use it. I do this on a computer. But if you wanted to crop your images, you could come in here, press the set button. Pressing the zoom icon, we can zoom in, we can zoom out. We can rotate it, we can choose our aspect ratio, and then when we're ready to save it as a new file, we can. I would never do this on my camera. We can resize, meaning we can take a large image and make it smaller. A lot harder to make a small image larger. Let's come back out. We can give it a rating, which will be recognized by Lightroom. If you give it a star rating, come in here and hit set. Pushing up, give it a 5-star rating, and then that would be ready to be filtered in Lightroom, for example. Slideshow, if you wanted the images to play through an HDMI cable to a TV monitor, you can set it up, determine the time it would be showing, a loop. Do you want a transition effect? We used to actually do this. You can upload music, kind of cool, huh? But we used to do this at weddings. We would shoot, a wedding, and at the ceremony, we would play this for, a certain amount of time. Guests loved it. The bride and groom loved it. How do we search for images? We can go by our star rating, the date, the folder, whether they're protected, whether it's a still or a video. And if we select this, for example, and we play an image, it should jump. See, it's jumping to the video. It's going 10 images and it's jumping to the video. So let me come back in. And so when I'm using the jump feature, which is the primary selector, we can determine whether it's going by 1 image, 10 images, a specific number that we designate, the date, folder, display movies only, stills only. So there's lots of ways to kind of jump around the images. I usually have the 10 on. Histogram display, there's a brightness in the RGB, so we see that when we play the image and we hit, come back here, we'll hit info, we start pushing the information button when we're playing an image back. Tons of data, there's the histogram. If we wanted to see an RGB histogram, there it is. Autofocus point display, when we turn this on and you play an image back, it'll show you which of your focusing squares were used. There it is. It's showing you which square was used, not so much what was being focused. If you focus and move the camera, this would not line up. What do you want to see when you play an image back? From the last scene or from the last image taken? Those are two different things, but if you want to, when you play, do you want to see the last image you played? Or if you didn't, you just wanted to see the last one you took, you would turn this off. Hopefully we'll have time to talk about the Wi-Fi settings. It can be a little bit tricky, just depends on how well the app is playing with the camera, but hopefully I'll be able to show that to you. And then we get into the yellow settings, which are the basic camera settings. We can select a folder that we're shooting in. We can create a new folder if we wanted to. We can have multiple folders. Back out here. File numbering deals with what happens when we replace the memory cards. So if I put a new memory card in there, do we want the file numbers to pick up where we left off, or do we want it to reset? We can also do a manual reset coming in here. Auto reset would be that every time you put a new memory card in there, it would reset. I have mine on continuous. I definitely recommend leaving auto rotate on. This is going to tell the camera to flip the image. If you shoot, portrait orientation, it'll automatically rotate it so it's not displayed this way for both the camera and the computer. Format your memory card. It's going to erase everything. So make sure you have 2 copies, preferably in different places before you do this. There's a certain workflow you should get into when you're shooting. As soon as I'm done shooting, I download my images, start backing them up, charging my batteries, and when I'm sure I have both, then I reformat. Auto power off, I have mine set to 15 minutes because I'm teaching. In real world, it's probably like 30 seconds or a minute to save battery. We can change the brightness of the display. See how we can make that brighter or darker. If it's really bright outside, that is going to matter. Date and time can be set here. Tons of languages. Look at all the different languages for the menu systems. Pretty crazy. NTSC for most of us, if you're on a PAL system and you're shooting video, this is where you would determine it. Touch control, we can make it more sensitive or we can turn it off completely. If we don't like our sound, we could turn that off. We can turn it off for touch only or altogether. Our battery information, I'm really impressed with the LP E17s. They look small, but they last longer than some other small batteries from other camera manufacturers. And a buddy of mine shoots weddings and he just carries a couple of them. So I know they do pretty well. Sensor cleaning. The auto cleaning feature is every time you turn the camera on or off, it's going to vibrate this filter that's going to kick off dust particles. If it's turned off, it won't happen. You can engage that now if you wanted to. And we can also clean the sensor manually. What this will do is it'll flip up the mirror, give us access to the sensor. I actually clean this on the crash course. I'll demonstrate that. Grid when shooting. If you want an overlay to be displayed while you're shooting, there it is. This is what it looks like. Tap the shutter button. It will not show up on the picture. There it is. We can flip-flop these 2 buttons. Some people like the cluster square being here. Others like it on top. We're just going to leave it the way it is. When we are dealing with HDMI, we can determine the resolution of the output. If we're doing HDR output, we can turn this on. You'll need a special monitor or recorder in order for this to work. The 5th item here is our custom functions. Not a lot of customizations here, and for the most part, I leave these on default. The first deals with the stop increments, 1/3 or versus 1/2 stop when we're changing exposure. ISO expansion I'll leave on. Safety shift, I have it turned off. Exposure compensation auto cancel, I have that turned on, which means that after we use exposure compensation, do we want it to reset? And we do. If you didn't, you could turn this on to disable. That would turn off the auto cancel. Mirror lockup. So the mirror is going to shake, and in certain long distance types of shooting situations, we want to have mirror lockup. So it's not going to work in live view. Push it once. You can hear the mirror flip up. Push it a second time. That would actually take the picture. It's a good little thing to know if you do like astrophotography or if you're shooting long exposures and you're trying to minimize shake. So the warnings that we see in the viewfinder, we can determine which ones appear, whether we have monochrome, when white balance is corrected, noise reduction, or we're using a spot meter. I really don't change any of these. The operation of the shutter button with the auto exposure lock button, this guy right here. This is really for back button focusing. Back button focusing is used by sports shooters where they want to determine one button to focus only, and it removes the halfway shutter button depression from the front. I don't really recommend beginning and intermediate photographers do this because they're still learning the camera, they're learning how to focus, and things of that nature. However, if you want back button focus, you would select this guy right here. And what that's going to do is it's going to move the focus to the AE lock button, this guy right here. So that's how you set up back button focus. There are some other options in here. This is still front button focus. And we don't get auto exposure lock with a halfway shutter button depression. But back button focus is this guy right here, number 1. Number 8 allows us to customize this set button right here when we're shooting. What do you want it to do while you're shooting? By default, it's the quick control screen, but we can have it do image quality, flash exposure compensation, screen on or off, menu display. So we get a little bit of customization over that. I leave it as the quick control screen button. The display button we can also customize and gives us some options in here. Maximum brightness, for example, pause movie servo. I leave it also for screen on or off. Screen display when power is turned on. It basically means that when we turn the camera on the first time, let's turn this off, turn it on, we should get the quick control screen. There it is. If you didn't want that, we could have it show the previous display screen. And then with power lenses, do you want the lens to retract when we turn the camera off? Yes or no? Default is yes. So those are our customizations. We can clear those settings in terms of all the camera settings or just those custom function settings. We can embed our name or our company's name into these details. So we could type this in, MM. That would save into every file that I take with this camera. If you're looking for the manual, you can scan this with a QR code or go to this URL. We have certain certifications here, right? We have our firmware version, and we can update as needed, which is basically the software. And typically after a camera comes out, the camera company will say, hey, this is going to fix some bugs. We download it to a memory card, we put it into the camera, and then we would update the camera's software. We've talked about the menus. This is, again, what we turned off as soon as we came in. And now we have our My Menu tab. So if there's only a couple things in here that you really use, we would create a tab. We'd come into Configure, select the items we want. Let's say we wanted image quality. We'd select that. Another good one is Format, like to format the memory card. There it is. So having selected 2 items, the items that I would use a lot, we can place those into this green tab so we don't have to go through the whole menu looking for these things. We could just find them here. That's what the My Menu tab is all about. We have some other settings in here that we could sort these items by changing their order. We could delete selected items. We can delete all the items on a tab. We can delete a tab. We can rename a tab, video shooting, or whatever it is you wanted. But that's the heart of the matter with the My Menu tab. And then we have the ability to add more tabs as well. So that's a really quick overview of the shooting menu when we're in stills. When we flip this power switch to the video icon and press the menu button again, we have a slightly different menu. It's easy to overlook, but when we come into the shooting mode, now we have resolutions. It's the same ones that are available in the quick screen. We have digital zoom, which is something I never use because it's digital. Digital zoom allows us to zoom in and out and things of that nature. I don't really use digital zoom because it's just magnifying the screen. It's not going to give us increased resolution. But if you wanted to check it out, here it is. And we can zoom in or out. It can be fun under certain applications, but I just don't use it. Sound recording. This is a setting we're going to want to have on manual. And you can see our audio levels. We have a mic input. And what you need to keep an eye on here is to make sure that we don't see this red clipping out. So what I'm doing is I'm going to turn this down. So when I snap my fingers or talk, we're not getting this red stuff. The wind filter and attenuator are designed to help minimize noise. I've never had success with the wind filter. The attenuator can be helpful in very loud environments. If you turn this on, it's going to put a dampener. But most of the time I don't use them. The main setting here is this one. Turn it to manual. Definitely any serious video recording, you're going to want to get an external microphone. The handling of the camera, the vibrations will be picked up on the internal microphone. It's not really great. We have lens aberration control. Oh, this digital movie, IS. This is image stabilization that happens electronically. And the way it does this is it magnifies the video and crops it so you lose resolution, which means this is something you can also do in post. So I never use it. Lens aberration correction is exactly the same as we discussed about for stills. It just applies it into video. We have our time-lapse movie. I'm going to be demonstrating this on the crash course. There are some really great tools that we can use this for in terms of shooting like landscapes, things of that nature. We can turn on a remote control setting if we have a remote. Video snapshot, not a really serious tool. I think they're like 4-second clips that we shoot. Let's see what else is different in here. Most of this stuff is very similar. I turn auto slow shutter off. That gives the camera permission to use a slow shutter speed if it's too dark. What else do we got in here? I think for the most part, a lot of this is the same. Yep, pretty much. And the rest of these guys are very similar as well. So that is a quick overview of the deep menu systems of the Canon SL3, and I hope you enjoyed it. Let's talk about connecting with our SL3 through Wi-Fi to our smartphone or device. Obviously, you're going to need to download the Canon Camera Connect app. I'm using an iPhone 10, so I got it on the Apple App Store. Google Play Store should have something equivalent. The way this works is that when we come into our menu section, purple tab, we have all these settings in here. We're going to go to Wi-Fi and Bluetooth connection. We're going to select smartphone. It's iOS. It's going to give us a QR code if we want it. We're going to hit OK. We're going to pair from Bluetooth. So this is the nickname of the camera. We can come into the app. So this is supposed to make the pairing process a little bit easier. And after you do it the first time, it should be a lot easier the next time. So we're connecting, introducing with Bluetooth. Hit OK. It's going to connect. And at this point, we're going to hit OK. Now it's paired. Now let's do the Wi-Fi. Manually connect via Wi-Fi to the currently paired smartphone. Here it is. Connect device to camera using the network settings, which means it wants us to come into our camera settings under Wi-Fi. I'm going to turn off my household Wi-Fi. The camera is putting out a Wi-Fi signal. I'm going to reset it, and we should see a Canon something. Here it is. It wants us to enter this password, which we see right here. This is for security reasons, so other people can't connect to your camera and download your images, right? 390085. I trust you guys. I don't think you're going to try to hack my camera. And once we're connected, it's going to think about it. We should get a little check mark here in a second. There it is. It's waiting to connect. And so at this point, we're going to come back into the app. Connection established. And that's how easy it is. I do think the Bluetooth pairing helps. Once we're connected, the best stuff is in the images on camera, but really in the remote live view shooting. The camera settings allow us to sync the date and time to the phone. We have limited information here. It doesn't really help us a whole lot. There is a Bluetooth remote controller that when I finish this, I'll demonstrate this. We can embed location data. It's not something I really use. And the idea is that we can download GPS positioning into our images. So if you turn this on and begin, logging, it's going to basically start this happening. It's going to drain your battery quicker between both devices, my understanding. I usually don't do this. So I'm going to turn this off. But this allows us to preview all the images, including raw images, video. There it is. We can come in here. We can give it a star rating from 1 to 5 stars. We should be able to look at some of the information. There it is. We can download that video clip. Depending on how big the video file is, this can take some time. See, it's compressing, it's processing, it's getting it ready. We don't need this. Yeah, we're going to stop that. We can send to a printer. We can delete it. Obviously, this can be handy if you got lots of images and you know, your camera is in your bag and you want to come through here and look at some of this stuff, maybe pick out a couple. We have the ability to change how we view from with this information to a grid, different grids. You can filter based on date, file types. Pretty cool. Here's all the cool stuff we can do in here. We have the ability to go between stills and video. I wanted to change that. It's right here. So there's the video mode. It flips over. Here's the stills mode. Some limited settings in here showing the auto live view, auto focus button, number of shots remaining, battery. We have our drives here on the bottom. We have our focusing cluster where we should be able to touch on the screen and determine where we're focusing. If we wanted to change our cluster, we could. Let's go with like a regular. Sometimes I have to touch it a couple times to get it to work. But it's working. Touch to focus. If you want to engage focusing, you press AF to take the picture. You slide over to take the picture. It should be a manual focus. We wanted it. Yep. We have our white balance. Coming into the video record shooting, we have our audio levels. You should be able to see them. We can control our resolution or determine our resolution. Microphone, including the gain. We have our servo AF. So the idea on this is that you can shoot remotely using your smartphone. You can put your camera into a position and you can take stills, you can take video, you can start and stop video recording. Yep, it's working. And in some cases, when I teach the video lessons, I'll demonstrate how to do this and why it's useful as a tool. If you do a lot of vlogging, you can use this to start and stop video recording. Very nice. Canon has, I think, one of the more polished ones. I've seen some other ones on camera systems. They just don't work as well. So that's where the good stuff is, right here. I want to show you the Bluetooth remote controller. We'll come in here and we will exit it. Yep, it's pretty much what it wants. So the Bluetooth remote allows us to simply take pictures remotely. We can start and stop video recording remotely. Should be able to. Oh, it's not cooperating for video. Look at that. Interesting. We have the ability to use it as a remote for playback of images. You can zoom in and out. Very nice. This transition effect, almost like the slideshow. So in any event, that is how you pair your phone to your camera. You introduce them first of all. Then you turn on your Wi-Fi, you connect. It'll give you remote shooting. You can view your images on the camera. And I hope you guys enjoyed it. When we're talking about accessories for our SL3, I have a few lens recommendations. The 18 to 55, it's a decent lens when you're just getting started, if you're doing a lot of outdoor shooting, when you have plenty of light. The problem with it is it doesn't open very wide, and this is limited to the construction of the lens, and I really think Canon's 50mm 1.8, a solid portrait lens for you. It's going to give you an ability to shoot in low light. I think that's a really, really good value. If you want something more telephoto, Canon has the 70 to 300. There's also a 55 to 250. Those kit lenses are okay in the beginning if you're shooting outdoors, and it will allow you to get started. There's also a 10 to 18mm wide angle lens. A lot of vloggers love that because it allows them to have some options when they're shooting very, very wide. There are tons of Canon lenses, and so the advice that I'm going to give you now is to basically say, try those out for beginners. And when you start to feel frustrated that they are not enough, that is the time to start looking at some nicer, higher end lenses that you're going to use for the rest of your life. If you go to my blog, michaelthemaven.com, you check out my gear page, I have tons of lens recommendations there, from affordable, lower end lenses to very high end, expensive lenses. And I usually have my thoughts on each of them as well. You are definitely going to want to invest into a tripod that is going to allow you to do things like long shutter speeds, set up for vlogging, landscape shooting. Bogg & Manfrotto has the Be-Free. There's a number of different variants of it. Sometimes in the low 100s, there's some nicer ones, just over 200. There's also the Mi Photo tripod. Get something with a locking ball head. I think those values are going to be better than something you might pick up at Walmart. The Walmart ones are a little flimsy and they break kind of easy. If you plan on doing any serious video work, which you can absolutely do, vlogging and things like this is a great vlogging camera because we can face the monitor towards ourselves. It makes it easy to get set up. If you're shooting in standard HD, we got dual pixel autofocus. The problem with all those things is the audio. The microphone on the camera is not the best. Rode makes a number of DSLR microphones designed to fit onto our hot shoe, and we can plug that into the mic port on the side of the camera. You can find a lot of these used on eBay for less than $100. That's probably where I'd recommend getting started. Speaking of which, if you enjoyed this video and you want to invest in your education with your camera, I promise you, 100% money back guarantee, it will be the very best education that you can get for your specific camera. If you want to be notified when that course is ready, check out the link in the description. We will email you and let you know when it's ready to go. Congratulations on your camera. Have a great day, and I will see you on the crash course.